September 11th, 2001. I'm in my office at Trinity Church Wall Street, which is in the financial district in Lower Manhattan. We're 3 blocks away from the World Trade Center towers. I'm 4 months into the dream job of a lifetime, but at 8:46 that morning, things change. I hear a loud crack, followed by sirens, and I go to the window to look out and I see papers swirling by. It's surreal. It's like a Yankees ticker tape parade, except all the edges are burned. A colleague and I run up the street to see if we can help, and we encounter people running from the chaos who are covered in ashes and soot and some in blood. I get to the foot of the South Tower just in time for the second hijacked airplane to collide with it, erupting into an apocalyptic fireball. The ground convulses, debris is falling, and we run for cover. We retreat back to our office building where we begin helping with the evacuation of the children from our preschool into the basement for safety. As soon as the children are in the basement, a terrifying sound signals that the first tower is collapsing, with one floor pancaking down on top of another all the way down. The ground convulses again, and before long, our building fills up with thick as molasses black smoke. And we can't see, we can't breathe. Choking and with children in our arms, we run out the back of our office building and make a run for it away from the towers, running south towards the Staten Island ferry terminal. And on our way down, the second tower collapses and we're consumed with a big cloud of gray ashes. I'm carrying in my arms a precious 4-year-old girl. Her name is Jasmine, and she's asking for her mother. I'm relieved to hear later that night that all of our children have been reunited with their parents. The next morning, I walked the 1.5 miles from my apartment to St. Paul's Chapel, the part of Trinity Church that is my charge. All the way down Broadway, I'm assuming that the St. Paul's has been demolished. How could an 18th century church building survive when towers across the street were demolished? As I got closer, I saw the spire of St. Paul's standing, and it took my breath away. With tears in my eyes, I could still see it for what it is, a beacon of hope in the midst of so much destruction. The horror of 9/11 was on a Tuesday, but by the weekend, we are organizing people and supplies to set up a makeshift feeding station in front of St. Paul's Chapel. This is affectionately referred to as the barbecue on Broadway. We're serving hamburgers and hot dogs throughout the day until the health department shuts us down. Imagine that. Then we move the food service inside. We continue serving meals, and we have some great volunteers to help us out, some of them actually quite famous. Soon we have services. We have massage therapy, chiropractic care, podiatry, grief counseling, and music. Some of the finest musicians in New York offering concerts 3 and 4 times a day to soothe, to comfort, and to inspire. And on any given night, we could have up to as many as 75 first responders sleeping in St. Paul's. The night shift volunteers do wake-up calls. And surprisingly, someone thought we needed teddy bears. Teddy bears at Ground Zero. One day we got cases and cases of teddy bears. What to do with the teddy bears? We put them in the pews, wondering what the response would be, and I'll never forget later that night seeing a tall, strapping firefighter come in, bend down, and collect 2 teddy bears, wrap them in his arms, and go for a nap. Such a moment of human tenderness and such an ocean of sorrow. The Ground Zero mission of St. Paul's Chapel was ongoing, 24/7, for 8.5 months. 15,000 volunteers served over 500,000 meals. I personally served over 240 days. Some days I'm called into the site to do last rites on body bags. St. Paul's emerges over the months into an oasis of hospitality and hope, where corporate CEOs are thrilled to serve coffee to cops and firefighters, where federal judges are honored to serve sandwiches to sanitation workers, and where bishops of the church mop the floors. The experience of this upside-down loving community is unforgettable. Another unforgettable experience, and a day of personal foreshadowing for me, was the day when Father Michael Lapsley was with us. Father Michael was one of the first white priests to stand against the apartheid government in South Africa. They sent him a mail bomb that took both of his arms and one of his eyes. He was with us to preside at Mass. And as I stood beside him at the altar and he elevated the host and broke it with the hooks he now has for hands, his sermon that day, which was all about moving from being a victim to living victoriously through forgiveness, was made palpable through witnessing his sacred act. Little did I know how much this would become my future also. You see, the heights of joy I experienced in serving at Ground Zero were soon to be matched by the depth of my despair. Like many of the first responders, when the mission was over, my life also fell apart. I was in a very difficult position, and I wasn't quite sure how to move forward. I was caught on the one hand between leading a group of zealous volunteers eager to help out and do anything in the disaster, and on the other hand, the leadership of a 300-year-old church rightly concerned about preservation. God help me. You see, my mother always taught me that if someone's in trouble, you help them out. And then if you can, you feed them. But the church leadership had other ideas. I felt as if I was in a tug of war between St. Paul's the mission and St. Paul's the museum. This conflict came to a head when I was told that I couldn't host a Thanksgiving dinner to honor first responders and their families. But the Waldorf Astoria stepped in and offered to cater it, making it an offer impossible to refuse. After Easter, I was told that we had to cut back to coffee and bagels and donuts in our food service. But the New York Times Neediest Fund, rightly, I think, seeing the impact on morale of the workers, stepped in and paid for the entire food service for the rest of the operation, April to June. And then I was asked, but Lyndon, when will it be a church again? I could only stammer my response. I don't think we've ever been more of a church. You see, I was up to my elbows living my mother's legacy as best I could. Healing kindness was needed to greet the shock and the sorrow of just about everyone who walked through the doors. I was overwhelmed, and I didn't get the support I felt I needed. Every time we did not live up to our capabilities in meeting the needs of this community, my anger grew. Months later, I'm in a packed audience at the New York Historical Society, watching a 22-minute trailer from a documentary that the church had produced on the ministry of St. Paul's Chapel to Ground Zero. And in 22 minutes, I was shocked to find out that I was not in even one frame, not one. I started this mission with the volunteers who gathered around us. I oversaw the mission for 8.5 months. It didn't just show up out of thin air, and it certainly didn't run itself. That day, I felt erased. It was as though nothing I ever did mattered to them. I hit a wall, feeling angry and betrayed and seeing no way forward. I resigned. The New York Times announces my departure. And soon, my life begins to fall apart. My marriage failed. We lost a house in foreclosure. I was diagnosed with PTSD and depression and about 5 other things related to my lungs, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe for years without using an inhaler nonstop. My life was in crisis in every imaginable way, spiritually, physically, financially, emotionally. And then because of my inability to get over the wounds, the trauma of my wounds, and my unwillingness to let go of my resentments, I made mistakes that would cost me my career. I was devastated. I spent a decade in a really dark place, my own personal ground zero, isolating. But good friends cared for me, and they held on to me. They continued to believe in me, to encourage me, and to lift me up. One friend even said that I should forgive, and I said, "Forgive? Are you kidding me?" I wasn't ready for that message yet. Another friend told me that I should spend only half my time thinking about how awful my life is, and the other half, I should count my blessings. It turned out to be sage advice. So little by little, over time, with fits and starts, I opened my heart to gratitude, and the grievances that had occupied my every waking thought began to fade. I discovered the best way to forgive is to be grateful for all the good things in my life and to focus on them and not on what I lost. Nelson Mandela said that not to forgive is like drinking poison and waiting for your enemies to die from it. I drank a lot of that poison. And if I'm honest with you here tonight, I have to confess that some of it tasted really good. But every time I took a sip, a part of me died. I finally realized that this isn't a story about other people, what they did or didn't do for whatever reason so long ago. Most importantly, right now, this is a story about me doing spiritual battle to free myself from the resentments I kept choosing to embrace. It was hard for me to let them go. Realizing this, it was time for me to face the brokenness in my life. It was time for me to make peace with what happened. It was time for me to take responsibility for my life. Now I have the privilege of collaborating with Dr. Frederick Luskin, the director of the Stanford University Forgiveness Project. He was the friend who told me that I should split my time 50-50 between my grievances and my blessings. I'm trained in the methodology that's put forth in his best-selling book, Forgive for Good. Fred's approach has been studied for over 20 years and found remarkably successful. Studies show that forgiveness can lead to less anxiety, less stress, lower blood pressure, fewer symptoms of depression, stronger immune system, better heart health, and more self-esteem. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. So, if you're angry with a former partner, you take that anger into every new relationship. I invite you to open the door to your healing through forgiveness. If you're bitter, you take that bitterness into every new endeavor. I invite you to build a bridge to your future through the power of forgiveness. Through forgiveness, each one of us can find healing for our past, peace in the present, and hope for the future. Last year witnessed the 20th anniversary of 9/11, a monumental anniversary. I got an email inviting me back to New York to participate in the calling of the name ceremony at St. Paul's Chapel. Got an email from the 9/11 volunteers. And I was so moved by this, and I thought to myself, what would it be like to be back? How would it feel? Would I be overwhelmed? As my wife and I began making our plans to go back to New York, I got a phone call. I got a phone call from the new vicar at Trinity Church in St. Paul's Chapel. He called me because he wanted me to know, to make sure that I knew that I'd be welcomed back. His kindness and seeing people I hadn't seen in 20 years was healing beyond measure. Had my heart still been marinating in bitterness and anger, I may have received this invitation in all the wrong ways. But instead, that morning when I walked into St. Paul's, I felt a deep-seated sense of peace and joy and freedom. And I realized that this church had seen many of the traumatic events in our country's history, and it certainly had witnessed my trauma. But that day I was reminded also that life is good, even when things sometimes go bad, and that every day brings with it new opportunities and blessings. Sitting there in that sacred space that day, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, I let my mind wander. So many memories. And the words of Khalid Hosseini in his masterful novel, The Kite Runner, came to me like a lingering, bittersweet goodbye. I wondered if that was how forgiveness budded, not with the fanfare of epiphany, but with pain, gathering its things, packing up, and slipping away unannounced in the middle of the night. Thank you.